Lewis and Clark, they dreamed of reaching the Pacific for years. And then they got there, and life got worse. What they were expecting was a victory lap. Instead, they got relentless mud and rain and difficult travel and hunger and months trapped on the Oregon coast. Yeah, when I heard that part of the story, I reacted the same way I react when someone says, "Hey Mike, this milk is rotten, you should taste it." Pure curiosity. So I decided to go to the area and see what all the complaining was about. Life-changing moments, not postcard views, those deeper experiences that really land. Not because the mountains have changed, because we did. We got faster, louder, more distracted, more comfortable, and honestly, more crowded. So I'm out here trying to see what can be done about that. Ocean to Ice, or OTI, is a 6-month, 1,000-mile backpacking expedition through the Pacific Northwest and Canadian Rockies, used as a living laboratory. I'm basing out of my van, the Silver Sasquatch, between sections and sharing notes from the trail. Since the last dispatch, I've been exploring the Oregon coastline, and one thing became quickly apparent. Lewis and Clark's names are attached to everything. Lewis and Clark roads and parks and rivers and schools. So I eventually decided I should become more acquainted with the people whose names are attached to half the Oregon coastline. So I downloaded an audiobook and started listening. One route kept appearing over and over again, the Fort to Sea Trail. The trail roughly recreates the route Lewis and Clark used between Fort Clatsop and the Pacific Ocean. Unlike many Oregon coast hikes, it winds through coastal forest, marshes, and lowlands before eventually reaching the beach. It sounds interesting, so I headed out to walk a few miles, partly for exercise and partly for history. And partly because Ocean to Ice has taught me that curiosity is usually worth following. Lewis and Clark left St. Louis in 1804, searching for something called the Northwest Passage, a hoped-for water route connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Problem was that it didn't exist, and they didn't know that, so they kept going. For more than a year and a half, they pushed westward across the continent, crossing rivers, mountains, plains, and territory few, if any, Americans had ever seen. Finally, in November of 1805, they reached the Pacific Ocean. This should have been a triumphant ending. It wasn't. Instead, they found relentless rain, cold weather, scarce food, and difficult travel. They were so miserable that they longed for the buffalo-rich plains they'd left behind. They established a winter quarters by building Fort Clatsop by hand. Eventually, spring came, and the Corps began the journey home. Mission accomplished. Except it wasn't. Years of work still remained. Journals had to be organized. Maps had to be completed. Scientific observations had to be compiled and published. Lewis, he struggled with the task. The journals remained largely unfinished. And then in 1809, he died before completing the work. For many decades, Americans barely knew the details of what the Corps of Discovery had accomplished. Then something unexpected happened. The story kept growing. The journals were eventually published, books were written, monuments were erected, trails, parks, schools, rivers, and historical sites were named after the expedition. Over generations, Lewis and Clark became Lewis and Clark, legends. As I walked the Fort to Sea Trail, I found myself thinking less about the Pacific and more about these last miles. Lewis and Clark had traveled an entire continent to get here, and yet the story wasn't even close to being finished. The strange thing is that if Lewis could somehow visit the Oregon coast today, he might be surprised by what people actually remember. The trail names, the books, the monuments, the schools, the historical sites, and the mythology. None of that existed when he reached the Pacific. None of it existed when he got home. Much of it didn't exist when he died. The significance of the expedition was still unfolding. That realization followed me through the forest and onto Sunset Beach because it feels surprisingly relevant to life in general. We tend to think meaning lives at the finish line. Reach the destination, finish the project, complete the race, climb the mountain, get the promotion, arrive at the Pacific. Then everything will make sense. Lewis and Clark suggest something different. The finish line wasn't the finish line. Some adventures reveal their value immediately, others take months, some take years. A few may require an entire lifetime before we understand what was truly meant. That feels like a lesson worth adding to the Ocean to Ice Field Guide. Don't measure an experience too quickly. The meaning often arrives after the milestone. So the next milestone is already up ahead, so I'll keep walking. Pack's on. Let's see what's still out there.
Clark, look! A creature of enormous size! Incredible. It walks upright like a man. We must document this for the president. Stay back, Lewis. It could be dangerous.